to this next story about RFK Jr. Now, to my surprise, there actually was a town hall with RFK Jr. Some people didn't know about it because it wasn't on mainstream media, but News Nation actually decided to host an RFK Jr. town hall. Now, News Nation is a network on YouTube. This is the network that Chris Cuomo actually is at now, and a bunch of other people that I don't know, to just be honest. But they're almost at, I think, subscriber wise, like they have over 881K subscribers. So they're up there like with that Breaking Points level. They still have bias. I'm just going to be honest with you. They still do have their bias, but they are less biased than CNN and MSNBC, but they still have that bias there. I'm just going to keep it real. But I will say kudos to them for volunteering to do a town hall, because obviously CNN doesn't want to do it. MSNBC doesn't want to do it. Maybe Fox will do one. I don't know. But there were a couple of questions that RFK Jr. did respond to last night that I do want to focus on. The very first one, let's just go ahead and get this out the way, because the number of people who have made criticisms about his voice, the way that he talks. Why is he talking like that? Why doesn't he clear his throat? Clear his throat. Well, he was actually asked about that last night. And so I'm going to play this. Let's get this out the way so no one will ask this question again. Okay. Here is RFK Jr. explaining why his voice sounds the way that it does.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Elizabeth Vargas. Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has his sights set on something that hasn't been done in modern U.S. history, beating the sitting president for his party's nomination for the White House. And so far, he's off to a solid start, polling at 15% against Joe Biden in a recent Emerson College poll. His connection to what is akin to American political royalty is right there in the name. RFK Jr.'s statements, however, on issues like vaccines and public health have critics calling him a conspiracy theorist, and others asking if he is the right person for the most important job in our nation, possibly the world.
I just think it's really funny that she says critics are, criticizing his takes. They're the critics. You are the critics.
Still, Kennedy believes it's his ability to take on that established power that American voters want. And that's why tonight is about you, the audience. It is your chance to ask questions and hear directly from Kennedy about the issues that matter most to you, live and unedited. And no topic is off limits. We've brought together Democratic and independent voters right here in Chicago, as well as in New Hampshire and South Carolina, the first states to cast their primary ballots in 2024. But first, everyone, please welcome me in joining Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to the stage. Chicago welcome. Let's get this part out of the way. Your voice is raspy. Why don't you explain to our audience why?
I had a very, very strong voice till I was 46 years old. It was unusually strong. And even at that time, I was making a lot of my income doing public speaking, and I could speak to large halls without any amplification. And then in 1996, when I was 42 years old, I got struck with a disease, a neurological disease, an injury called spasmodic dystonia, and it makes my voice tremble. And I actually, at the time, I didn't know what was wrong with it, but when I would go on TV, people would write me letters and say, "You have spasmodic dystonia, and you should see Dr. Blitzer, who is the physician who was most famous for treating it." And I ultimately went to see him, and he confirmed that I had the diagnosis. So it makes it, I think it makes it problematical for people to listen to me. I cannot listen to myself on TV. I will never listen to this broadcast, and I won't listen to any. So I feel sorry for you guys having to listen to me.
All right.
But I'll say one other thing, that my throat was much worse, and I went to Japan with Cheryl about 6 months ago and had a novel surgery that they only do in Kyoto. And it made my voice much better, which you probably won't believe, but it was much worse than this before. So.
Thank you for watching. Go to News Nation now.
Okay. So, and now that we've got that out of the way, so hopefully no one else will ask me that question again. Let's get that question out of the way. Now I want to go to another question, and this is causing quite a stir, at least on social media. You know, Donald Trump actually has had good things to say about RFK Jr., that he actually likes him and respects him. So, of course, that was one of the questions that they did ask RFK Jr. last night. I want you to hear his response to that. And honestly, I think this is the correct response. Listen to this.
You say that you're a Democrat, but you're getting a lot of support from a lot of leading voices on the right, like Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, former President Donald Trump. Many Democrats fear that you're a spoiler in the race, that you will damage President Biden in the primary and grease the skids for former President Trump to return to the Oval Office. This week.
Let's just pause here for a second. This piece right here, I'm sorry, I have to say something about this.
You will damage President Biden in the primary and
people fear that you will damage President Biden in the primary. That's the point. That's why he's running for president. What kind of question? What is that? What kind of statement is that? You think he's running in the primary to make things work for Joe Biden, to help Joe Biden? No, you challenge a politician in a primary because you don't think that they're doing a good enough job, because you want them gone. You want them to lose. You don't primary challenging them because you want them to win. This is the craziest thing I ever heard of. It's like when I played sports, it's like I never went to a game, wanting my competitor to win. I went to those games to beat their ass. I'm sorry, but that doesn't make any sense.
Grease the skids for former President Trump to return to the Oval Office. This week, former President Trump said about you, Kennedy is smart and he's a common sense guy. What kind of man do you think Donald Trump is?
Well, here's what I'm not going to do in this race. I'm not going to attack other people personally. I don't think it's good for our country. And I think, what I'm trying to do in this race is bring people together, is to try to bridge the divide between Americans. And guess what? When my dad died and we took this train ride from, this 7.5 hour train ride that was supposed to be 2 hours, I was with him when he died in Los Angeles. And then we brought his body from New York, Penn Station to Union Station and Washington, D.C. And it was a 2.5 hour ride, but it took 7.5 hours because there were 2.5 million people on that train track. And it was the cross-section of America in all of the major urban stations in Trenton, Newark, Wilmington, and Baltimore. There were Black Americans singing Battle Hymn of the Republic. There were whites in the rural areas who are holding up signs, "Goodbye, Bobby, pray for us, Bobby," American flag, standing, saluting. 4 years later, and they had supported my father in the primaries in 1968. 4 years later, in 1972, they were not supporting my father, and they were not supporting George McGovern, who was aligned with my father on all these issues. Instead, the vast majority of them were supporting George Wallace. Mm-hmm. And, my father was able to harness these populist energies. In the last day of his life, he won the most rural state in this country, South Dakota, and the most urban. He was able to bridge the divide among people who would otherwise be Republican, but wanted somebody who was common sense, who was able to appeal to their idealism, who was able to find the hero in each of them, who was able to get them to transcend narrow self-interest and see themselves as part of a community and part of this, incredible American adventure in modeling self-governance for the rest of the world. And so I'm proud that President Trump likes me, even though I don't agree with him on most of his issues.
That piece right there, I think that's the best way to answer that question, because that really just upsets that will upset the Democrat like pundits for real, because the thing is they don't want him to say that. What they really want him to do is they want him to trash Donald Trump. They want him to make, he said he doesn't want to make personal attacks. They want him to make personal attacks at Donald Trump. You can beat your competitor without making cheap shots and without making personal attacks. Again, another sports analogy I'm going to use here. I played sports. A lot of you, like some of you probably played sports. And that was one of the things that like my coach taught us. You don't have to make personal attacks like some people would trash talk like on the court. You don't have to make personal attacks at your opponent in order to beat them. You can beat them just by playing the game. And so he can criticize Donald Trump's policies without attacking him personally. That's not what News Nation wants to hear. CNN don't want to hear you say that. MSNBC don't want to hear you say that. They want you to attack Donald Trump. When you start preaching this message of talking to people who don't always agree with you and unifying people, that's what gives them pause. Because how do you respond to that? What is your follow-up question after that? If you're trying to get them, you know, what do you say? He wants to bring people together. That means you have to talk to people that don't agree with you. And some people may not like that. But how are you going to unify? Like Joe Biden said, he was running on the soul of the country. How are you going to unify people if you're not even willing to talk to people that disagree with you? What is this, a half unity? So think about that for a second. So I thought that was the best way that he could answer that question. Obviously, he mentions like, you know, like his father was able to do the same thing.
Because I don't want to alienate people. I want to bring people together. I'm proud that all these people like me and that I have independent supporters and Democratic supporters and that I'm able to bring a lot of people. You know, every Democrat says, I want to end the polarization. But how do you do that without talking to people who don't agree with you? How do you do that without appealing to people? Without my purpose is to find the issues, the values that we have in common, rather than, you know, focus on the issues and the personalities that keep us all apart.
Thank you for watching.
Sorry, it keeps playing that part. I hate that. But yeah, Leroy's correct. It was a mature response. Exactly. That's not what they want to hear. They want you guys to fight. Like they don't want, you know, because when you start talking to people that you may disagree with, like politically disagree with, then you may start to realize maybe you do have some commonalities there, particularly if we're talking about like a class issue, and they don't want you to have that discussion. Now, the next question that he dives into is the immigration issue, the border. I want you to hear how he responds in reference to this, because I think that, you know, RFK Jr. did go to the border and he recorded himself while he was down there. And he said, like, look, we have a problem here. The border is not like protected the way that he feels that it could be, right? This isn't something that's new, though. Like we've had this issue for a long time. Now, we'll say in reference to that issue, well, then maybe instead of just addressing, you know, closing off the border, which I don't think that's going to fix the problem, closing off the border, maybe we should also be asking this question. Why are so many people coming in the first place? What's happening in their home countries? What is the U.S. government? What has the military done to their countries to the point where they don't even safe there anymore? They're willing to make a dangerous trek to get across the border to come into this country. And I think if you're going to talk about immigration, and I'll just keep this real, if you're going to talk about immigration and the issue at the border, you have to connect that to the militarism that is happening abroad in those countries and the imperialism as well. And I think if you can do that, I think you can win over a lot of people.
Mr. Kennedy, you were recently at the border. You toured it to get a firsthand look. You called it a dystopian nightmare and said that you would seal the border. And I want to go now to our first question from the audience, Josue from Chicago.
Hello, I'm the son of Mexican immigrants and the husband of a Honduran immigrant. And so my question is on immigration. With Congress unable to reach an agreement on comprehensive immigration reform in decades, what is your plan to address immigration?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and thank you, Josue, Is it Josue? Okay, I don't think that it's going to be possible to get an immigration reform package through Congress until we seal the border, because we've got now in the last 3 years, 7 million people have come across the border illegally, and the most disturbing part of me is I witnessed the humanitarian crisis, the cruelty to these people who are being brought to the border. They're being exploited, they're being extorted, they're being raped, they're being robbed. The cartels are now running U.S. immigration policy, and everybody knows that. There have been 9, we were told by the Border Patrol, there have been 9 suicides of Border Patrolmen in the last year.
I have to jump in here for just a second because I do want people to really understand this. Sealing the border does not prevent people from coming into the country illegally. And I want to give you an example of one of the easiest ways that people can come into the country illegally: by plane. You see, a lot of people think that people are coming across the country or coming into the country illegally on foot, like walking across the border. Yes, those things do happen. But a lot of people come into the country illegally via plane. So this is why I want to be very clear about this. Sealing off the border, that does not prevent people from coming through on the airlines. And yes, it does happen. It happens more often than you would realize, because a lot of people don't talk about that. They show you the video footage of immigrants coming across the border, across the southern border. That's easy to do. What they don't show you is the video footage of immigrants coming into the country illegally via plane. And that's why a lot of people assume that most of it is coming on foot. That's actually not true. Most of it is coming via plane, guys, in the air. Let's go on.
Because they're so demoralized about what's happening. They are literally, it took me 3 days at the border to understand what's happening. The first night I watched, I got there at 2:00 in the morning, stayed there until about 4, and I watched just hundreds and hundreds of people coming across. The first group was about 60 African men from West Africa, mainly from Cameroon. I thought I was going to see Central Americans and, Guatemalans and Salvadorians, but I didn't. We only saw, in the whole night, there was only 2 families from Latin America, one from Colombia and one from Peru, and all of them had been brutalized and every penny taken away from them. The rest of them were from Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tibet, Nepal, Pakistan, and many, many from China. The cartels are now advertising all over the world that there's an open border, and they are bringing people in. They give them videos about exactly what to do. They fly to Mexico. They're given visas there, internal visas in Mexico. They go from Mexico City on a plane to Mexicali. They're loaded on fleets of buses and then brought to the border. They cross. The only role of the Border Patrol is to stamp them in and check if they have a criminal record. If they don't, they are brought to the airport and they are given a ticket to any city in the United States that they want to go to.
Well,
This is a good point, Elsie. Yes, after their visas expire. That's another thing too, because once you're here, you're here. Now, obviously, you're not supposed to stay here after your visa expires, but people do. So that's a good point. Thank you for that, Elsie. I forgot to mention that. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the video.
have to demonstrate need and apply for asylum.
No, they're given a court date. And the court date is a cursory court date. It's like an arraignment. And then their real court date, which they're not going to show up to, is 7 years later.
But I think the question that we need to ask here, even when she's bringing up like the asylum issue, right? People should be able to come they're allowed to come to the border and, via asylum. But why are they coming to seek asylum? This is the piece of the puzzle that is often left out of the conversation. Why are they coming here seeking asylum? What is happening in their country? Why are they fleeing their countries? The number of times I hear people have this discussion and they leave that piece out is very important.
So they're essentially given a 7-year pass to stay in this country.
So how would you seal the border?
Well, you know what? It's not that hard, because
How would you do it?
I would do it. I mean, there's a number of things that you have to do. I was against Trump's wall, but having seen it down there, I see that you were required to give a physical barrier during certain, not all the way 2,200 miles from San Diego to Brownsville, Texas, but certain highly densely populated areas, you need a physical barrier. But in the hinterlands, in the wilderness areas, you can use sensors like they do in Israel, the ground sensors and
There's all
towers.
sorts of AI breakthroughs too. But you would rebuild, you would resume the building of Trump's border wall?
Well, a lot of it now has been rebuilt. You know, Mayorkas, who's the DHS secretary, recognized that the gaps in that wall, that we shouldn't have left them. But it's not.
So this is where Bobby Kennedy should have came in when she said she's trying to do a gotcha. When she says, oh, you would continue Trump's border wall. This is where he should have came in and said, well, Biden has been building onto Trump's border wall. That would have been a good chance for him to throw like a, kind of cheap shot there at Joe Biden. But then also, I want to tell you guys, these walls don't work. Building walls, people will still find a way in. So again, like I've said before, we need to address the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is that their countries have been destroyed. Why do you think there were thousands of like Haitian migrants like trying to come across? There's nothing left for them to go back to. And most of the time it's been destroyed by our government. These walls, that's not the answer. The answer is not to create a big wall. Ask Germany, ask East Germany and West Germany how well that wall worked out. And don't come for me on that. I lived in Germany. So the thing is, ask them how well that wall, people still got over the damn wall. So this is something that people need to address.
So much the wall, it's the other censoring devices that were all ripped up. Which I'm very embarrassed to say by this administration, by the Democratic administration. And also the policies were changed so that the presumption is everybody gets in. And I witnessed it myself. And we can't have that.
Everybody's not getting in.
Yes, everybody gets in.
There are crowds of people waiting to try and apply through the new app that the Biden administration has set up. They're setting up.
As for legal immigration.
Oh, you're talking about illegal immigration.
I'm talking illegal immigration. Everybody.
Of course he's talking about illegal immigration. Why do you think he's talking about sealing the border and the wall? Yikes. She lost it, huh?
Gets in. I watched it. 7 million people have come in. Just the one little section I was at in Yuma, there's 350,000 people came here before. But I met with the Yuma authorities, I met with the hospitals, I met with the centers that take care of the immigrants who are, beleaguered. I met with the Border Patrol and the sheriff, and everybody agreed it could be stopped. It could be wound down to what it was before this administration, which was about 25 people a day, which is not a big problem. But having now it's 300 to 800 a day. And that, no nation can survive if they can't protect their borders. As president, I will expand legal immigration. I will make it easier, particularly for workers to come across on the H visas and then, and bring in and have an orderly system that benefits our country. Immigration is good for our country. This kind of immigration is unfair to everybody, and particularly to the immigrants that have been brought here. And then over the long term, the immigrants that have poured in from Latin America, a lot of them are coming up because of policies, wrongful policies that the U.S. has had, the drug wars, the austerity programs, the support of juntas, the war on the poor that we've maintained for so many years, and we need to change those policies as well.
Yeah, but I don't know about that view right there. Like I really don't. I really hope that he does not believe that this is going to be the solution, because and you can study this. If you look up history, you can study other countries that have had these strict border access or had a wall or whatever. People still will find a way to get in. And my thing is just like, what is the underlying issue? There's also a very significant focus of Mexico, people coming from the southern border, right? People come from Canada. Canada's not, look, I'm in Massachusetts. Canada's not far from me, believe it or not. I could drive to Montreal like that, boo. It's not far from me. People come across the Canadian border illegally too, but you don't hear about that. You don't hear about that as much. But I don't think the answer, the solution is sealing people off. I don't think that's the answer. Next question that he goes on to, and this one really could cause a stir to people. RFK Jr. explains why Democrats should vote Joe Biden out of office. Now, this is a big one. Listen to this.
Before that, though, I want to say you're asking Democratic voters in this room and across the country to do something that hasn't been done in 167 years in this country, to vote out a president of their own party. Not to mention replace him with somebody who hasn't even held elective office. Why should they take that chance?
Who cares if they've held elected office? Some of the clowns that we've had in DC that have held elected office for decades don't do shit. Let's just be real. How great of a job are they doing? How great of a job is Joe Biden doing? And he's been a politician for over 40 years. At this point, I don't care if you've held office or not. In fact, I might prefer that you have not, because then I know you're not a part of the machine. Interesting.
I mean, I'm running because I feel like my party has lost its way. That the values that my uncle represented, my father represented when they were Democrats, have been neglected, let's say. And I want to try to bring the Democratic Party back to those values, the values that were, in favor of focus on the middle class in this country, focused on labor, on racial, on the well-being of minorities in this country, focus on the environment, particularly on civil liberties and freedom of speech, which the party has seems to have forgotten about. And the party traditionally was anti-war as well. My uncle, President Kennedy, was asked by his best friend what he wanted on his epitaph, on his gravestone, and he said he kept the peace. He said the principal job of an American president is to keep the country out of war. And the Democratic Party has represented those views since its inception. And I think,
great part, biggest job of the president is to keep the country, to keep the peace, to keep the country out of war. We haven't heard that. I haven't heard that my whole life.
Particularly what we're doing now in Ukraine is a departure from that. And I don't mean that, I'm very, very sympathetic to the Ukrainian people, and I am not sympathetic to Putin, who invaded the Ukraine brutally and illegally and unnecessarily. But we have neglected many, many opportunities to settle this war peacefully. And by the way, my son, Connor, went over to the Ukraine and fought for a special forces unit. He was a machine gunner, and he fought in the Kharkiv offensive. And so I, myself and my family are very, very sympathetic to the Ukrainian people. I think.
Are you very, very sympathetic to the Palestinian people? Because it doesn't seem that way. It seems like, the response is, I support, their ambition. I support their efforts. Is usually a response from him. Are you very, very sympathetic to the Palestinian people? That is one of the questions that I would ask if I interviewed him. That is one of the questions that I would ask.
The way that we have conducted the war is bad for the Ukrainian people. It's terrible for the Ukrainian people.
Thank you for watching. Go to News Nation.
I hate that they do that after everyone. Okay, so that question there, it was really interesting to me the way that she worded that. Like, you're asking the American people to do something that had never been done before. A lot of things hadn't been done before. Let's talk about things that weren't done before. At one point in time, we sent a man to the moon. It wasn't done before. Do you not try because it wasn't done before? These people want to maintain the status quo. And speaking of maintaining the status quo, this is probably the question that made people want to pull their hair out the most. He is asked that dreaded question, will you support Joe Biden if he is the nominee? Dun, dun, dun. Listen to this.
As a lifelong Democrat, as you just said very passionately, will you pledge to support whoever the Democratic nominee is, whoever it is, whether it's you, whether it's President Biden?
Oh, of course.
That didn't make any sense. Hold on, let's go back. She said, whether it's you. Hold on.
As a lifelong Democrat, as you just said very passionately, will you pledge to support whoever the Democratic nominee is, whoever it is, whether it's you, whether it's President Biden?
Whether it's you, why would he not support himself? Will you support the Democratic nominee? Whether it's you, Joe Biden, whoever it is, why would he not support himself? Somebody explain this to me. Come on.
Oh, of course I'm not going to do that. I'm not
going to do that.
No, of course I'm not.
So
Listen,
if you don't get the nomination, you won't support President Biden?
I don't know what I'll do. Let's see how let's see what happens in this campaign. Let's see, what if people are living up to democratic values and having debates. And
We're going to go back to that one because it was the way the response to me was funny. Hold on. I totally hear you as well, Marco. No, I would not support my own run for the president.
Whoever it is, whether it's you, whether it's President Biden?
Oh, of course I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to.
So, very straightforward answer. Of course, I'm not going to do that. Now, he's referring to Joe Biden. Listen to this, though.
No, of course I'm not.
So
Listen,
if you don't get the nomination, you won't support President Biden?
I don't know what I'll do. Let's see how let's see what happens in this campaign. Let's see, if people are living up to democratic values and having debates and having discussions and, talking to each other, but I'm not going to buy.
And if you feel that's not happening, would you then support a Republican or run as an independent?
See how she then pivots to, are you going to support the Republican candidate if you're not going to support the Democrat candidate? You see how they do this? You can choose not to support any of them. Any of them. She goes, are you going to then run as an independent? Like, the look on her face is hilarious to me. But we'll go back because there's something I remember from another interview. We'll go back.
But my plan is to win this election, and I don't have a plan B.
Okay.
Thank you for watching.
All right. I want to show you something. There's a slip up here. Watch this.
It's President Biden?
Oh, of course I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to
do that.
No, of course I'm not.
So
Listen,
if you don't get the nomination, you won't support President Biden?
I don't know what I'll do.
All right. So first he says, no, I'm not going to do that. Then she says, if you don't get the nomination, you're not going to support President Biden. He said, I don't know what I'm going to do. But that's interesting because in the first Breaking Points interview, when he was asked that question, his response was, I don't see myself supporting anyone who's for the war. So I have a feeling that he does not want to do that, but I feel like for whatever reason, he's holding back a little bit and saying explicitly, I will not support Joe Biden, period. He could have been advised not to say it explicitly. It could have been Dennis Kucinich's campaign manager. He was in Congress. He was part of the Democratic Party. Maybe Dennis Kucinich gave him the heads up. Look, whatever you do, you might want to be careful how you answer that question. Don't say explicitly that you're not going to support Joe Biden. That's why I felt like he walked it back a little bit and said, I don't know what I'm going to do. But in the Breaking Points interview, the very first one, he said, I don't see myself supporting anyone who supports the war. So let's go on.
Let's see how let's see what happens in this campaign. Let's see, if people are living up to democratic values and having debates and having discussions and,
that part there sounds a little bit similar to what Marianne Williamson said when she said it depends on how they treat me.
talking to each other, but I'm not
And
going
if
to
you feel
buy.
that's not happening, would you then support a Republican or run as an independent?
You know what? My plan is to win this election, and I don't have a plan B.
Now, there's a piece from this that's missing. Let me pull this up. I noticed this from their clip versus the one that Pasta had. So I just want to make sure you hear the full thing. Because I noticed this. I'm like, why did they cut out? They didn't play the entire thing. So let me see where Pasta posted that one. Give me just a second. And I can't talk about, obviously, you guys know on YouTube, I can't talk about what he said in reference to the jab. I'm sorry. Here it is. Okay. Let me come out of here and let me play the part from Pasta. I just want to make sure you get the full thing. Yeah, I'm gonna move this here so I can get the Bernie thing. Okay, here we go. Because Pasta hosted this last night. So here we go.
The interesting thing I thought, Chris, I'm not sure what your highlights were, but I found it very interesting that he refused to pledge to back whoever the Democratic nominee of the party is. I think, in fact, we have a clip.
As a lifelong Democrat, as you just said very passionately, will you pledge to support whoever the Democratic nominee is, whoever it is, whether it's you, whether it's President Biden?
Oh, of course I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. No, of course I'm not. Listen,
if you don't get the nomination, you won't support President Biden?
I don't know what I'll do. Let's see let's see what happens in this campaign. Let's see, what if people are living up to democratic values and having debates and having discussions and, talking to each other, but I'm not going to buy.
If you feel that's not happening, would you then support a Republican or run as an independent?
You know what? My plan is to win this election, and I don't have a plan B.
The interesting.
Okay, now let me make sure I didn't miss, because I just want to make sure. Okay, so that was the same ending that he had as well. So Pasta said at the latest town hall, RFK refused to blindly pledge his backing to the Democrat if he should win the nomination. By the way, Pasta will be here tomorrow night, so we'll get to talk about this as well. Now, why is that important, and why do I focus on that? Because remember how I told you there's this pledge that they sign, this form that they sign or whatever? Someone tagged me in this. Thank you so much. This was the form Bernie Sanders signed. I want to show you something. All right. First of all, let's see. It says Bernie Sanders, and this was 2019. Okay. Listen to what this says. I hereby affirm that upon publicly announcing my candidacy for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States in the 2020 election, I am a member of the Democratic Party. I will run as a Democrat, accept the nomination of my party, and I will serve as a Democrat if elected. I understand that signing this form does not supplant any legal or party requirement by any state or territory to qualify for ballot placement in that jurisdiction. Now, here's the kicker. Further, I acknowledge that the national chairperson of the Democratic National Committee is authorized to determine whether a presidential candidate has established substantial support for their nomination as the Democratic candidate for the office of the President of the United States is a bona fide Democrat whose record of public service, accomplishments, public writings, and or public statements affirmatively demonstrate that the candidate is faithful to the interests, welfare, and success of the Democratic Party of the United States and will participate in the convention in good faith. This piece right here. The DNC is authorized to determine whether a presidential candidate has established substantial support for their nomination as the Democratic candidate of the office of the President of the United States. This just proves to you what I've been telling you and what the Becks, the lawyers, the Becks who came on the show, the ones that filed the DNC fraud lawsuit, this just backs what they were trying to explain to you. At the end of the day, it is up to the DNC. This is what they signed. Now, I don't know if they're still signing this today, but Bernie Sanders signed this, and you'll see this is his signature. This was 2019. He signed it. It was also notarized. You see the notary there? Okay. All right. So, what does that tell you? That at the end of the day, no matter how good of a candidate you are, the DNC is the one that makes the decision. Just like the DNC decided to give super delegates to Hillary Clinton, even after Bernie had won every county in West Virginia. They can do that. They argued this in court. This is why you can't do it through the Democratic Party. This is what I was trying to tell you guys. So Bernie Sanders knew that as well. Okay? When he signed this form, he knew this as well. So this is what RFK Jr. is going to run up against. At the end of the day, the DNC makes the decision, and the DNC has decided to go with Joe Biden. And that's why I said RFK Jr. should not run through the Democratic Party. He should be running as an independent or third party. But that's obviously not happening. And mark my words, if he starts to get higher than 20%, oh, they're going to pull all kinds of trickery, but they're going to get Obama up in that mofo. They're going to try to do everything. Everything. They're already starting. That's why they're starting with the smears early. But yes, there was a town hall with RFK Jr. last night. And I noticed from the comments, it seems like a lot of people didn't know about it, but it did happen. So you can probably find the full one on YouTube. Interesting. Let's go to the comments. Exco? News Nation tries to be middle of the road. Interesting. LB says RFK visited the border, something Joe Biden wouldn't do, or Kamala. That's true. Sharon, write him and tell him that, Sabby. Get Kim to email him. Yeah, man. I invited him on the week that he announced, like when I covered his campaign on the ground. When I covered his announcement on the ground here in Boston, like I asked for him to come on back then. And like every couple of weeks, I'll get like an email from his press team, not from him, from his press team saying, you're in the queue. And I'm like, yeah, I know I'm in the queue, but it's pretty obvious that the bigger outlets, he's going to go onto those first. That's what's been happening. So you probably will never see him on here. If so, be very surprised. Hell, I'll be surprised for you. Cryosynth, Bernie signed that pledge on behalf of his supporters, especially the ones who supported him financially. Mizu, Sabby Sabs, if I was RFK Jr., I would gaslight them until the end, then sucker punch them with a third-party announcement. I don't even know if you can see, that's the other thing. I don't even know if you can do that. Like if you agree to support, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what happens.